1 week season.
All right, OWS fam, glad you are with us here on the program. We are back in the DFS lab. It's presented by 1 week season. And again, as always, the purpose of this show is to build a DraftKings lineup and then talk through it. You use that as a vehicle to talk strategy for the upcoming slate. We are coming to you on Friday, September 13th. So we are headed into the weekend. I'm your host, Cheeseman. A couple of quick housekeeping items. You can check out all of this week's episodes of the DFS lab in the description right down there below. Also, we have chapter markers now, so if you want to skip straight to lineup building or skip to really any part of the video, you can do that on the play bar, or you can just go to the description as well to find those chapter markers. And as always, if you find value in this content, we'd love it if you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And with that, he is Papy at 324, and he joins us now. Papy, how you doing, man? We're 2 days away from getting this slate kicked off. How you feeling about this slate so far? And did you enjoy watching the games last Sunday?
Oh, loved it. You know, it was, like I said, a holiday. I had all my screens up in front of me. I was watching every game that I could. It was I would say a average-ish week, barely moneyed in my main lineup. I was like the last person that cashed in the Wildcat. I might have been the last one that cashed in the Wildcat. But hey, a cash is a cash, right? So you take it, and you go on to the next week. You know, the Panthers defense is whatever. Cash with a -1 defense, you certainly take it. Yeah, but can't wait for week 2. I think week 2 is a very interesting week in a lot of ways, especially from an ownership perspective. I think it's going to be a very chalk-heavy week if the ownership projections are correct. And being that I'm going to build for a $20 Millie Maker lineup, I'm going to build for a large field lineup. I think you can really gain a lot of leverage this week if you look at the ownership projections.
Yeah, let's jump right into it here and take a look at ownership. What is jumping out to you when you take this initial look at ownership?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a nuts week to me. Ownership is just incredibly concentrated, and when we look at the guys at the top, Hall at 45%, that's incredible on a full slate with this many games. I mean, I know that he is not priced properly, but still, 45%. I mean, really, is he going to be that popular? And I think he probably will be. And then the other two players, the Rams, right, Williams and Kupp, and they're listed here at 29 and 27%. I honestly think they might be higher, especially Kupp. We saw 21 targets, which is just totally absurd last week. You would think, like, why doesn't the other team double him and pick somebody else beat
Those
them?
are video game numbers right there.
I mean, I don't even throw to a guy that much in Madden. It's ridiculous. And so I think that both of those guys, while objectively they're very good plays. I mean, the Rams offense is so concentrated and they have a good matchup. I mean, they are objectively good plays, but we're talking about 30% ownership there. And then of course Mason being the other one who's probably going to be mega chalk, and he is dependent on CMC. And we have, a lot of really strange injury news coming out about CMC. I mean, first of all, he said last week he was 100% going to play. And then Mason on the post-game interview kind of let the cat out of the bag and said, I knew I was going to start on Friday. And I was watching that and I was like, oh, they're going to PR that one because they'll get in trouble for that. Like, they didn't tell him, hey man, you gotta lie and say, yeah, he tweaked it in pregame warmups. He was just honest. And
it's like someone forgot to tell Jordan Mason, like, hey, keep this tight to the chest, right?
Yeah, you know that. Like, they didn't give him the media coaching he needed there, and he slipped up, but they PR'd that one pretty quickly. And then this week, CMC has said he's going to play, and you've heard that he was close last week, but then you hear other reports that he's not really that close, and he's not going to play. And all of this stuff, man, it all goes back to Bill Belichick, these coaches lying about injuries on the injury report. That's really how NFL coaches think they get an edge. It's ridiculous. They're like, oh man, if we tell them it's Jordan Mason and not CMC, they're not going to know what to do. Like, they'll know what to do. Bill Belichick,
I think they're being so sneaky.
They do. Bill Belichick was winning because he had Tom Brady, like, not because he was lying about injury reports. But that has become a trend in the NFL ever since, is to lie about injury reports. So my personal feeling is CMC is going to sit if he did start, I guess it wouldn't totally blow my mind, but I'm going to operate under the idea that he's going to sit. And that would make Mason, another clearly mispriced player. And so, projected for 30% ownership here. I think that could be higher.
Yeah, especially in small field stuff.
Yeah, a lot of turbo chalk this week.
Anything else that stands out before we kind of move into lineup building or even leverage off of that? Or do you want to wait until we're actually into building the lineup to look at that leverage?
Yeah, so we can segue into the lineup here because in a large field, we're going to try to build a lot of leverage off of those ownership projections. And I think the one thing that really stands out to me more than anything coming into this week and how to build sort of a large field tournament team is, what about the Tampa Bay Detroit game? I'm just going to
look back at this again real fast because, Baker's 5%. That game is also a 50, 51-ish total. So
highest total by over a field goal. I mean, the other ones have a 48 total. It has a 51.5 total. And Goff is also at 3.5%. There's really no one in that game that is going to be chalk. Evans is supposed to be under 5%. Laporta is supposed to be under 5%. ASRB, I think, is supposed to be around 10 to 13%. Goodwin is only supposed to be 16%, I think. He's the heaviest owned. Gibbs, I think, is only supposed to be 13%.
Gibbs has got a great matchup on the ground.
Yeah, Monty is basically an afterthought. I think he's only 5%. White, I think, is 8%. There's no one in this game that is expected to really draw heavy ownership. And to me, that's sort of insane because it's the highest total game. It's being played in Detroit, where we know a lot of shootouts happen, and Detroit especially puts up a lot of points at home, or can put up a lot of points at home. When you see a Detroit game at home with a 51.5 total, you're almost always going to see a lot of chalk coming out of that game. And we don't have that here. So,
it's true. Yeah, I definitely like that game environment. And just from a game planning standpoint for Tampa Bay, this is not a game where you can kind of sit back and say, maybe they will try ball control, but they're probably going to realize, like you said, Detroit scores points. And so they're going to realize we have to stay aggressive. No lead is safe. And Detroit, they can put up points. They have a dynamic running game. And also they have the weapons on the outside as well at home. So I like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think people are looking at what happened last week in the Detroit game where they basically came out and ran the ball. And it's like, oh, okay, of course they're gonna do that again. I'd rather just say this is Detroit's offense at home in a 51.5 point total. And if that game goes off, that game could really go off. So that game is the starting point for my build, for the Millie Maker this week.
Okay, so we're gonna do the fantasy football millionaire on DraftKings. 206,000 is the field size. So let's jump into that. So start at quarterback. So you saying, well, which quarterback are you putting in this lineup?
You could do either. I think either one is a fine, but we're going to go with Goff for this one. And hey, man, Jared Goff, right? Like he, 3%, 3% at home. It's home Jared Goff. High total. I feel like at that ownership, he's a great starting point for any, large field team, in my opinion. And
absolutely.
We know that he doesn't really run. And so whenever I have a quarterback who is not a running quarterback and I'm looking to build a game stack, I'm almost always going to pair him with two of his possible pass catchers. And I got
to say real quick, sorry to interrupt. I'm pretty sure I saw a prop bet for Jared Goff last week for the Sunday night game for rushing yards, 0.5 rushing yards over under. So when you say he doesn't rush, you're not kidding. Anyway, back to what you were saying. Go ahead.
0.5, man. You can't even let him get a QB sneak.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't run, and so we want to pair him with two of his possible pass catchers. And the way that I think is kind of a unique or interesting way to do that is to use Gibbs as one of them as a running back. And
I like that.
We know Gibbs has a big passing game role, right? He gets basically all the passing game work out of the backfield. And for whatever reason, people tend to be very reluctant to play a quarterback running back combination. It hits more than people give it credit for. And so whenever you do that, especially when you're using a guy like Gibbs who has a big passing game role and a guy like Goff who doesn't really run, so if he throws him a touchdown, it's the stack is going to hit. You're probably getting a little bit of EV almost every time that you do that, just because it's underused for how often it actually hits. And then the other guy that I want to put in here is Laporta, tight end, and he's the top tight end. His ownership to me is way off. I mean, 3% ownership for Laporta, really? I mean,
look at this tight end. Yep. Yeah. I mean, right now we have it at OWS has it at 5%, but still extremely low for. I mean, his ceiling is huge. Huge ceiling. Could easily put up 100 yards and a touchdown, and if this stack were to hit, because I think that if people play Goff, you're going to see it more with ASRB, maybe more with JMO, depending on his injury situation. I mean, I think he's going to play, but depending on what happens there, I think you'll see him with Goff. So I think that's the way people will probably stack it. So I think this will be a unique stack within a unique game to stack, which sounds weird to say, being that it's the highest total game, but there's a lot of uniqueness here starting here. And then the guy to bring it back with, Mike Evans. Love it. I mean, I know you may be repeating yourself a little bit, but just to kind of give our viewers, I mean, why do you think people are fading this game? Is it because they just are assuming Detroit is going to run the ball, and so we don't see a lot of passing production coming from this game, or the clock's going to move faster? So I think there's a couple reasons. I think one, the overwhelming popularity of the Rams, of Kupp and Williams. They are priced right by Evans and Gibbs. And so if you look at that, right, that's got to be a contributing factor. The other one is Kels at tight end is going to be very popular. He's priced right by Laporta. Jaden Daniels is going to be very popular. He's priced right by Goff. So there's a lot of chalk that is priced right by all of these players. And I think people are overreacting a little bit to last week. I mean, the Lions didn't come out and put up one of their typical, we're going to throw the ball and put up 40 points at home type games. And people are saying, okay, well, they just ran the ball a lot last week, so they're probably going to do that again. Maybe not. There's a 51.5 point total here. So to me, this is sort of an easy leverage play. Like, I think that you have to be brave a lot of the time on leverage plays. You have to say, well, I'm going to take a lower total game and I'm just going to predict that this one goes up. How brave do you have to be to stack the Lions at home? I don't think you have to be that brave. Yeah, it's definitely a much higher chance than ownership is giving it right now. So, okay, we got, do you want to target any other players from this game, or are you good in terms of stacking up this game in terms of this lineup? So that's where I'm going to stop with this game for this lineup. So we're going to go with two pass catchers from Detroit plus the quarterback, and then we're going to go with Evans. Now, you can probably take a guess here that I'm not going to play the Rams on this lineup, and you can probably take that guess just by looking at the salary, and that I'm kind of talking about creating leverage off of the Rams. So if I'm not going to play the Rams on this lineup, then I'm predicting their offense is not going to perform as well as expectations. So if we go to defense and special teams, all the way to the bottom, boom. Doesn't take a lot to think I'm going to go with the Cardinals defense. So the bet that you're making in this case is that the Rams offense, for whatever reason, is going to struggle. I mean, again, Puka is out, and so sometimes when you remove a big piece from an offense and they're on the road, an offense could struggle.
So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's the most likely outcome that the Cardinals, shut down the Rams offense.
Right. Again,
It's
we're
not,
building. Yeah.
but we're building for a $20, dollar Millie Maker here. And also, they are at home, and it is a division game. And funny things do happen in division games. And at 2,300, they just don't need to do much. I mean, as long as they don't get run out of the gym, if they can just even create a turnover or a couple sacks, or fingers crossed the ball bounces their way, they get a defensive score, they're already there. So the main thing though here is not even predicting or thinking that the Cardinals defense is going to be some great play. It's just strategy of, hey, I'm not going to play the two chalky Rams on this lineup. So what if they fail? What does that mean? Maybe the Cardinals defense is doing better than expectations. They're the cheapest defense on the slate.
Yeah.
Let's get them in there.
Setting yourself up to benefit if that scenario does happen, you're benefiting in this lineup.
Yep. And let's go ahead and get our other salary saver in here. And this is going to be another guy who I think is leverage. And if you go to wide receiver, you're going to find Lazard at 3,300. And this is leverage off of Hall, right? And so, again, we're staying away from Hall. He's supposed to be 45% owned, which is massive. If he doesn't get it, who does? You could certainly look at Wilson, who's going to be under 10% owned too, but we're looking to save salary here. And I thought it was incredibly interesting that Lazard actually played the most snaps of all of the Jets wide receivers last week. And, that's interesting. I had a good chunk of Lazard in Showdown. I thought that he was probably going to be a little bit better than his price was, at least in Showdown, but I did in no way thought that he was going to play the most and have the involvement that he had. And I know that, he's Rodgers' boy, and Rodgers and his familiarity, that matters a lot and all this stuff, but I would have never predicted he would have played the most snaps. And so that type of snap rate alone for a guy who's basically min priced. And again, if you're looking to play somebody that is not Hall or could, hurt Hall, if the game flow ends up where, the Titans are ahead and they throw more, or if just Lazard gets the TDs and so Hall doesn't, he makes a lot of sense to me, again, from a leverage and how much he was on the field and his price standpoint on lineups where you're not going to play Hall.
Yeah, I mean, you could find for 3,300, it's a strong play. Absolutely. So that gives us, obviously that opened up some more salary as well. So we got almost $6K remaining per player with 3 players to go. Where do you want to go next?
All right, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do another little mini correlation here. And we're going to start with McLaurin, F1 at wide receiver.
Okay, so he's probably 50. Same price as he was last week.
Yeah, and the reason why I think he's interesting is because Jaden Daniels is expected to be the heaviest owned QB. But McLaurin is not projected to be very highly owned. He's only projected to be around, I think, 5 or 6%. And that's interesting because it's not as if there's another receiving threat there that you would think is going to do anything. I mean, we don't even really know how much everyone's going to play behind him. He's the only one we know for sure is going to be a full-time player. And while Daniels didn't look great last week as a passer, his decision-making and his accuracy certainly looked like, they weren't anything special. He really just looked like a runner. He did just miss F1 on a long touchdown pass. And if that play hits, then people probably feel much differently about F1 this week.
Yes.
So if Daniels, let's say that, last week Daniels had, I think, 16 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's quite a lot of rushing production. What if this week he has more like 50 yards rushing and no rushing touchdowns, but instead he throws for 200 yards and 160 of them go to McLaurin and McLaurin catches a touchdown? Like, that's possible.
It is.
And, in that scenario, you would have Daniels putting up a very average to mediocre game where McLaurin is actually the one that you want. And everyone's going to have that backwards. So I think he, in a way, is his own kind of leverage off of Daniels, because if it's more of a throwing than a running game for Daniels, Daniels might not put up the fantasy points he did last week, and McLaurin would probably be the beneficiary of that. So
Yeah, and you feel like with his price, I feel like with his price too, there's definitely meat on the bone in terms of his ceiling. I mean, 5,700. I feel like he has a bigger ceiling than what his price is really reflecting.
Yeah. And then the other guy we're going to put in here at running back to sort of complete this little mini correlation is Singletary. Devin Singletary, I think it's 5,700.
Yep, there he is. Okay.
And the idea here is, again, that, we're kind of taking a shot that New York Giants-Washington game has more points, but we're trying to say those points come differently than the field is gonna think. So you're certainly going to see some ownership on Neighbors, assuming that he plays. And you're probably going to see even maybe a little bit of ownership on Danny Dimes, hoping that it's a good Danny Dimes game if you stack him up with some of the Giants. But the guy who I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of ownership on is Singletary. And that's interesting because he was basically a modern day workhorse last week. I mean, he played 70% of the snaps. He didn't get,
15 opportunities.
Yeah, and he didn't get a ton of carries because they were losing all game. And so, they were throwing, but he still saw the targets. And he's probably going to be in mostly a 3-down role. I think Tyrone Tracy played 21% of snaps or something like that and was really just a change of pace guy. So when you look at somebody who's priced below 6,000, which is, into the cheap range for RBs, played 70% of the snaps and got essentially all of the usage. Why not? I mean, if he ends up doing well because the Giants are winning and he gets the touchdowns and he gets more carries, and then that helps McLaurin because then the Commanders are throwing, that little mini correlation there, I think, is just predicting the points come in that game differently than how the field is going to see it.
Yep, totally. That leaves us one spot left here in at the flex, 6,200 remaining. And what direction you want to go here? This last pick.
So you could go ahead and take a prediction if you want. It is going to be a $6,200 player, and we're going to go with Travis. We're going to go with
double tight end build, and in the Millie, I like it.
The double tight end build this week. Not a huge double tight end guy. I don't do it all that often, but when I do it, I tend to do it in large field play because it's often underused in there. And to me, this is a week where the two top tight ends could both put up big scores. They're both relatively cheap because they didn't have good games last week, right? They're both about as cheap as you'll see them. If they both have a good game this week, they're going to be more next week. And as far as getting Mr. Swift in there, I do think that he has just
I missed that for a second, but I got it now. Yes.
Yeah. Getting Taylor's boyfriend in there. I'm just doing it so maybe for our 5 girls who watch this, they can say, look, he got him in there.
Well, he also got a nice haircut. Did you see his haircut?
Yeah, so that brings me to my point of that, he might just have a little bit of an ego, just a little bit of an ego. And, he didn't, maybe just a little. And he didn't really get used last week. If you watch the tape, they kind of sold out to take him away. The Ravens basically said, we're not going to let him beat us and we're going to make the other guys beat us. And guess what? The other guys beat them. So I think if other teams see that, they're probably going to be less likely to just sell out to take away Travis, And I think that this is a good example of a week where people are, talking a lot about his demise and his decline. And it's not that he's going to be lightly owned. I don't think he's going to be lightly owned. I think he probably will be the heaviest owned tight end, but most of this lineup has all lightly owned guys. So getting him in there, especially with 2 tight ends, which will be naturally less used, isn't really a big deal for ownership perspective. I think this is a week where they try to get him going. I think this is a week where they look his way more. The Bengals are not great at containing tight ends. In fact, if you look at the Patriots game last week, the Patriots barely threw at all. But the only real success they did have was throwing to their tight ends, Hooper and Henry. And so I think this is a week where they make a concerted effort to get him involved. I don't think it's going to be another dud for him. I could see a multi-touchdown week. I could see a 100-yard week for him. And I think when you pair him with Laporta, I think you're really going to have a sort of naturally low owned combination there because people don't want to play the double tight end.
Yep, exactly. So you're giving yourself that unique build style there. And I did like how you said I don't normally build double tight ends, but when I do, reminds me Dos Equis commercial. Anyone? I don't normally drink beer, but when I do, it's Dos Equis.
But when I do, it's the two best tight.
Yes, exactly. In the Millie. Any final thoughts, Pappy, before we ship this one out?
I really actually like this week. I tend to find that I have my bigger weeks on weeks when there's a heavy concentration of chalk, and I usually go away from it. This is a week where I feel like I'm either going to get first or last. It's a Ricky Bobby type week, and so it is. And so you're going to be first or last, but that's okay because DFS is really all about the weeks when you get first. If you hang in there and you tread water and you're basically breaking even and you're taking shots every week and you try to bink that one big week, that's not a bad way to end up being a successful DFS player. And so when you have weeks with a ton of chalk, highly concentrated, those are weeks where be brave, have courage, say, you know what, maybe I'm going to finish last, but maybe I'm going to finish first. And those are weeks where I personally think over the years I've had my bigger weeks.
Oh yeah, and it's great advice, and it reminds me actually of poker. You have to be aggressive. If you only ever play your best hands, then you're not gonna be able to cash in your biggest hands because people are gonna know he's got a big hand. You got to be aggressive, be unpredictable. But in this case, yeah, you want like a week where your the way your mind works and kind of the way you build lineups. If it hits, you want it to really benefit in a huge way, many multiples, hopefully, on the weeks that you do hit.
Yeah, the poker reference is good. A lot of us, me being a chess player and then poker and then going to DFS, I played a lot of live poker and used to play with a woman named Flush Mary, who was an older lady, and it was like she only played aces and flushes. So she would just sit there forever and fold, and then eventually she'd go all in, and everyone was like, "Oh, well, you have the nuts. Of course, I'm just gonna fold." And so yes. It's a good example. Don't be Flush Mary.
Hey, we'll have to play chess sometime. I'm actually a big chess player myself. I'm not as fresh as I used to be back in high school, but maybe we'll get an online game going sometime.
Yeah, sure. I was a pretty serious chess player in my youth.
I love that. Pappy, thanks so much for being with us, man. Good luck this weekend. And thanks for being on the DFS Lab.
Yeah, it's great to be here. This is one of the most fun things to do all week.
It is, building lineups. And make sure to head to oneweekseason.com. Check out what they got going on over there. And everyone, thanks for being with us in the lab today. Good luck this weekend, and we will talk to you next week.